The air in the infirmary hangs thick and heavy, a cloying quilt woven from the scents of carbolic acid, unwashed wool, and the faint, metallic tang of blood. Outside, the Wyoming wind howls a lonely dirge around the rough-hewn timbers of Fort Bridger. But inside, there is only the quiet industry of healing and the ragged breathing of broken men. Alara Vance sits on a stool beside a narrow cot, her back aching with a familiar, persistent throb. Her fingers, stained with ink, move with a steady grace across a sheet of crisp paper, the nib of her pen scratching a soft counterpoint to the groans of the wounded. She is writing a letter for a boy who cannot be more than 17, his face flushed with fever, his arm a ruin of shattered bone beneath a mountain of bandages. He dictates in weak, halting phrases, his words raw and simple. Tell her, tell Mary, I miss the smell of her baking, the apple bread. Tell her I see her face when I close my eyes. Alara's pen transforms his desperate fragments into poetry. My dearest Mary, she writes, not a moment passes that my heart does not ache for you. In the quiet hours of the night, I find solace only in my memories of you, in the sweet scent of apple bread fresh from your oven, a fragrance that speaks to me of home and of a love that sustains me across these many hard miles. Your face is a lantern in the darkness, the last thing I see before sleep, the first I search for upon waking. She is a conduit, a vessel for the love these men cannot express themselves. It is a sacred duty, one she has performed for months. Her own heart is a locked room, the key long since lost on some forgotten battlefield with her fiancé, Thomas. This work is all she has left. That, and the secret she carries beneath her nurse's apron, a gentle swelling that has become impossible to fully conceal. She is with child, a life created in love and hope, now a source of shame and escalating peril. The soldiers see her as an angel of mercy. The officers' wives, with their sharp, knowing glances, see her as something else entirely. She is a fallen woman, a problem to be solved, a stain upon the fort's decorum. Her time here is running out. But there is another secret, one known only to her. For weeks, she has been receiving letters of her own. They arrive in plain envelopes, the postmark smudged, addressed simply to Nurse Vance. The handwriting is a strong, slightly clumsy script. The words inside are tender, beautiful, and achingly familiar, echoing the very sentiments she pens for others. They speak of devotion, of quiet admiration, of a shared life she has never known. They are all signed the same way, your loving husband. She tells herself it's a cruel prank, or perhaps Thomas's brother, forwarding old letters he might have written and never sent. Yet the paper is new, the ink fresh. Each letter is a mystery that both comforts and terrifies her. Today, a man has been watching her. Silas Kane, a scout, not a soldier, brought in weeks ago with a bullet-torn shoulder. He is quiet, almost unnervingly so, with eyes the color of a winter sky that seem to see more than most. He never asks for a letter to be written. He just watches, his face an unreadable mask. Now, his recovery near complete, he approaches her cot, his boots scuffing softly on the plank floor. He doesn't hold out a piece of paper for her to write on. He holds out one of the letters. One of her letters. Ma'am, he begins, his voice a low rumble, rough from disuse. He extends the envelope, the one signed by a husband she does not have. I reckon this belongs to you. And I reckon I'm the one who sent them. That was a close call. Before we see how Alara navigates this shocking revelation, tell us in the comments. Have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised? And if you love a story of hidden depths, hit that like and subscribe. The world tilted on its axis. The infirmary, with its familiar sounds and smells, receded into a dull, humming backdrop. All Alara could see was the letter in Silas Kane's hand, the creased envelope a testament to the foolish hope she had allowed herself to feel. She had read it a dozen times, tracing the words with her fingertip, imagining a life, a love, a legitimacy that was not hers. And the author of that fantasy was this quiet, hulking man who had spent the last month watching her from the shadows of his sickbed. The word was a breath, a whisper of disbelief and rising anger. He had the decency to look ashamed. His gaze dropped from her face to the floorboards. "Yes, ma'am." She rose from her stool, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. The sleeping boy in the cot beside her stirred, and she instinctively lowered her voice, her words now a furious, heated hiss. "How dare you? Those words, where did you get those words?" "From you," he said simply, finally meeting her eyes. There was no malice in them, only a deep, weary resignation. "I heard you, writing for the others. For weeks. You have a way of saying things. Things a man feels but can't get out." The violation of it struck her like a physical blow. Her service, her one pure thing in this complicated, unraveling life, had been stolen. It was a parlor trick she performed, giving voice to the hearts of others, and he had sat there, listening, collecting her phrases like a man gathering wildflowers, only to rearrange them and present them back to her as his own. "So you copied them?" she demanded. "You plagiarized men's feelings and sent them to me? Why? As some kind of joke? To mock me?" The thought that her secret vulnerability had been the source of his private amusement was mortifying. "No, ma'am. Never a joke," he said, his voice earnest. He took a half-step closer, then seemed to think better of it. I can't write. Not like that. I can scratch my name, is all. I'd see the other men, after you wrote for them. They'd have this look on their face. Hope. And then I'd look at you, when you thought no one was watching. And you didn't have that look. You gave it to everyone else, but no one was giving it to you." His explanation did nothing to soothe her fury. It only deepened the complexity of his transgression. This wasn't a cruel joke. It was something far stranger, something born of a pity she didn't want. "And the signature?" she pressed, her voice trembling. "Your loving husband, what was that supposed to mean?" He shifted his weight, his broad shoulders slumping. "Seemed like you needed one. Seemed like a husband is what you were missing." He gestured vaguely toward her middle, a motion so blunt and artless it stole her breath. The whispers started. "I heard them. A woman alone. It ain't right, the way they talk. I figured if letters were coming from a husband, maybe they'd quiet down. It was a foolish thing. A damned foolish thing. I know that now." He reached into the pocket of his canvas trousers and pulled out a small, heavy leather pouch. He held it out to her. It clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. "This is my pay, from the scouting detail. It ain't much, but it's what a husband would do. Provide. I wanted to give you back some of what you were giving everyone else." Alara stared at the pouch, then at his face. The anger began to recede, replaced by a profound and weary confusion. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a trickster. He was just a man. A lonely, illiterate man who had witnessed her loneliness and tried to fix it with the only tools he could find. Her own words and a clumsy, desperate lie. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. She felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her throat, but she choked it down. "Take your money," she said, her voice flat, "and take your letters. And you will not speak of this to anyone. You will not speak to me again. Do you understand?" He flinched as if she had struck him. He slowly pulled his hand back, the pouch of coins seeming to weigh him down. He gave a single, jerky nod. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and walked away, his stride even, his back straight. He didn't look back. Alara stood there for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt exposed, as if he had peeled back her skin and looked directly at the frantic, frightened heart of her. He had seen her need, and in his own misguided way, he had tried to meet it. The thought was more unnerving than any cruelty. The incident settled over the following days like a fine layer of dust, present but unspoken. Silas Kane was discharged from the infirmary, and Alara felt a pang of something she refused to name as relief. She tried to push the entire bizarre episode from her mind, focusing on her work, on the steady rhythm of changing bandages, cooling fevered brows, and writing letters filled with words that now felt hollow and foreign on her tongue. But the fort was a small, insular world, and the whispers Silas had tried to quell were growing into a chorus. Her condition was no longer a matter of subtle conjecture. It was an obvious fact, discussed in hushed tones in the sutler's store and over tea in the officers' quarters. She felt the eyes on her back everywhere she went, a mixture of pity, condemnation, and prurient curiosity. The wife of Major Davies, a woman with a face like a clenched fist and a spirit to match, became her chief tormentor. Mrs. Davies saw Alara not as a person, but as a moral failing that reflected poorly on the fort's command. She made a point of ignoring Alara in public, of turning her back with a theatrical sniff whenever Alara entered a room. The pressure culminated one crisp autumn afternoon. Dr. Abernathy, the chief physician, called her into his office. He was a stern, pragmatic man, not unkind, but a firm adherent to the rules of both medicine and society. He did not ask her to sit. "Nurse Vance," he began, shuffling papers on his desk without looking at her. "Your work here has been exemplary. You are a fine nurse, one of the best I've had." "Thank you, sir," she said, her stomach twisting into a knot. She knew this was not a preamble to a commendation. However, he continued, finally lifting his gaze to meet hers. His eyes were not unsympathetic, but they were firm. "Your situation has become a topic of discussion. It is unseemly. Major Davies has lodged a formal complaint. It affects morale, you understand." She understood perfectly. She was an embarrassment. "I have defended your position for as long as I am able. But my authority has its limits," he said. "You have 1 month, Alara. 1 month to produce a marriage certificate or a husband to claim you. If you cannot, I will have no choice but to terminate your employment and ask you to leave the fort." The words landed like stones. Leave the fort. A pregnant, single woman cast out with winter approaching. It was a death sentence, or something very close to it. Where would she go? What would she do? The meager savings she had would not last a week. She walked out of the doctor's office in a daze. The world seemed to have shrunk to the size of her own impending doom. She went not to her room at the boarding house, but to the small, sparse chapel at the edge of the fort. She sat in a hard wooden pew, her hands clasped over her belly, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she wept. Not quiet, dignified tears, but great, gulping sobs of pure terror. She didn't know how long she sat there, but when she finally looked up, her vision blurred, she saw a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light. It was Silas Kane. He did not move or speak for a long moment, as if asking permission to enter her grief. When she did not send him away, he walked slowly down the aisle and stood before her pew. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim over and over. "I heard the doctor," he said quietly. His voice was different now. Not rough, just low and steady. "I was fixing a loose shingle on his roof." Alara said nothing. She had no words left. He took a deep breath, the sound loud in the silent chapel. "Marry me." She stared at him, sure she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his voice unwavering. "On paper. A transaction. My name is Kane. It's not much of a name, but it's a name. It will give the child a name. It will give you protection. It'll stop the talk." The proposal was so stark, so devoid of any sentiment, that it barely registered as a proposal at all. It was a business proposition. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "I started this," he said, his gaze direct and heavy. "With the letters. I made a mess of things, trying to help. This is me, trying to clean it up. The right way this time." He looked down at his boots. "When I'm fully healed, when the winter breaks, I'll ride out. You can tell them I died in a scouting accident, or that I just left, a deserter. Either way, you'll be a widow, not what they call you. You'll be respectable. You and the child will be safe." She looked at his face, at the earnest set of his jaw, the worry in his winter sky eyes. He was offering her his name, his reputation, what little he had of it, as a shield. He was offering her a future, a chance to survive. It was a lie, of course. Another lie, built upon the foundation of his first one. But this lie offered sanctuary. Her tears had dried, leaving behind the cold clarity of desperation. She had no other options. Her life, and the life of her unborn child, depended on the answer she gave to this strange, silent man. "All right," she whispered, the word feeling momentous and utterly terrifying. Yes, the wedding, if one could call it that, took place 2 days later in the office of the traveling magistrate, a portly, perspiring man who seemed more interested in his lunch than in the union he was consecrating. The only witnesses were the magistrate's clerk and the ever-present Wyoming wind rattling the window panes. Alara wore her plainest gray dress. Silas wore the same canvas trousers and a flannel shirt that she suspected was the only one he owned. He had washed it, though, and combed his dark hair with water. They stood side by side, not touching, two strangers entering into a contract of mutual desperation. Do you, Silas Kane, take this woman, Alara Vance, to be your lawfully wedded wife? The magistrate droned. Silas's voice was a low rumble. Edo. And do you, Alara Vance, take this man? She felt a wave of dizziness. She was marrying a man whose middle name she didn't know. A man who had deceived her, however noble his intentions. She was binding herself to him, forsaking the memory of Thomas, the love that had been the anchor of her life. But then she felt a faint flutter deep within her, a tiny, insistent reminder of the new life she was protecting. I do, she said, her voice barely audible. The magistrate stamped the document with a flourish. Well then, you're hitched. That'll be $2. Silas paid him without a word. He folded the marriage certificate, a flimsy piece of paper that now held the weight of their entire world, and tucked it into his pocket. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Kane, he said, testing the sound of it. It sounded foreign and wrong to both of them. There was no celebration, no kind words from friends. They walked out of the magistrate's office into the bracing wind, a married couple in name only. The awkwardness between them was a chasm. I've procured a place, Silas said, breaking the silence. The old tanner's cabin, edge of the fort's land. It's not much, but it's private. He didn't offer his arm. She didn't expect him to. They walked toward their new life, separated by a foot of space and a universe of unspoken things. The cabin was exactly as he described it. Not much. It was a single room, smaller than her boarding house quarters, with a stone fireplace, a rickety table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. The air was musty with disuse. But Silas had been at work. The floor was swept clean, there was a neat stack of firewood by the hearth, and a pail of fresh water sat by the door. You take the bed, he said gruffly, gesturing toward it. I'll make a pallet by the fire. The lean-to needs repairs before it'll keep the snow out. He expected no argument, and she gave none. This was the shape of their arrangement. He was the provider, the protector. She was the charge. She moved her few belongings, a small trunk of clothes, her medical texts, and a box of letters from her mother, into a corner. The space felt crowded with the presence of 2 people who did not know how to be in the same room together. That first night, they ate in silence. Silas had shot a rabbit, which he'd stewed with some wild onions. It was simple, nourishing food. He ate quickly, his eyes on his plate. Alara picked at her portion, her appetite gone. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the scrape of spoons against tin bowls. When they were finished, he took their bowls to the wash basin. She sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, feeling like a guest in her own life. The roof leaks a bit by the window, he said, his back to her. I'll patch it tomorrow. Thank you, she murmured. The silence stretched again, thick and uncomfortable. She should be grateful. This man had saved her from destitution. He had given her his name, but she felt only a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were watching a play about her own life from a great distance. She retreated to the bed, pulling the thin quilt up to her chin, and feigned sleep. She listened as Silas moved about the small cabin, his movements quiet and economical. He banked the fire, checked the lock on the door, and then settled onto his makeshift bed on the floor. She heard him sigh, a deep, heavy sound in the darkness. They were husband and wife, separated by 10 feet of cold floorboards and a lie that was now their only truth. The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Silas was true to his word. He was a constant, tireless presence. He patched the roof, chinked the walls with fresh mud and grass, and built a sturdy new set of shelves for her books and supplies. He would leave at dawn with his rifle and return by dusk, sometimes with game, other times with a sack of foraged roots or late-season berries. He never came back empty-handed. He was providing. He rarely spoke unless necessary. His communications were actions. A fresh bucket of water waiting for her in the morning. A new, smoother handle car for the heavy cabin door. A warm, flat stone left by the fire for her to rest her feet on in the evenings. These small, silent gestures were his language. Alara, in turn, tried to make the cabin a home. She scrubbed the floors, washed the single window until it gleamed, and mended his torn shirt with neat, nearly invisible stitches. She used her knowledge of herbs to make a soothing salve for his still-healing shoulder and a tea to help him sleep. They orbited each other in the small space, two celestial bodies held in a delicate, unspoken gravitational pull. The letters, the ones he had written, she kept in a small wooden box at the bottom of her trunk. They were a source of shame, a reminder of the bizarre genesis of their current life. But she could not bring herself to burn them. They were all she had of the man's heart, even if the words were stolen from her own. One afternoon, as a light snow began to fall, she found him struggling to read the label on a tin of peaches he'd bartered for at the Sutlers. He held it close to his face, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving silently. He looked up and saw her watching, and a dark flush crept up his neck. "Just checking the date," he mumbled, setting the can down abruptly. A sudden impulse, born of a growing, reluctant compassion, moved her. "I could teach you," she said softly, "to read properly." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and deep, guarded longing. "No need for that. It would pass the time," she insisted gently. "Winter will be long. We'll need things to do." He hesitated for a long moment, wrestling with his pride. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. "All right." And so, their evenings changed. After their silent supper, she would bring out one of her medical texts or a tattered copy of Shakespeare that had belonged to her father. She would point to the letters, sounding them out. A, B, C. He was a surprisingly quick study. His mind, so adept at reading the landscape for tracks and signs, latched onto the patterns of the words with a fierce intensity. Apoth Isari, he sounded out one night, his finger tracing the word in her medical journal. One who prepares and sells medicines. He looked up at her, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "Like you." "Yes," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "Like me." In these moments, the chasm between them seemed to shrink. They were no longer just parties to a contract. They were a teacher and a student, two people sharing a quiet purpose. She learned the landscape of his ignorance, and he, in turn, was learning the landscape of the written world that she inhabited so easily. Their fragile peace was shattered during a trip to the sutler's store for flour and salt. Alara went alone, feeling the need for a moment of normalcy, however illusory. The store was crowded, a hub of warmth and gossip against the deepening cold. As she waited her turn, Mrs. Davies entered, flanked by two other officers' wives. She saw Alara, and her face tightened. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Kane," she said, her voice carrying across the room. The chatter died down. "How is your husband? We see so little of him. One almost forgets he exists." "He is well, thank you," Alara said, her voice even, her gaze fixed on the sack of flour in front of her. "Is he?" Mrs. Davies took a step closer, her eyes gleaming with malice. "It's a curious thing. No one seems to know anything about this Silas Kane. He's not enlisted. He has no history with the army. He simply appeared, a convenient savior for a woman in need of 1 inch." The implication was clear and venomous. Alara's cheeks burned with shame. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the store on her. "My husband is a scout," Alara said, forcing a strength she didn't feel into her voice. "His work keeps him private." Mrs. Davies let out a short, unpleasant laugh. "Private or phantom? Tell me, dear, can this phantom of yours even write his own name? I hear he's a common illiterate." a rather flimsy shield for a woman of your education. The cruelty of the attack was breathtaking. It was aimed not just at her, but at Silas, at the very secret they were nurturing in the quiet of their cabin. Alara opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. She was trapped, exposed, the fiction of her life unraveling under the bright, harsh lights of public scrutiny. She felt a familiar despair begin to close in, cold and suffocating. This was it. This was the end of the charade. She would be cast out after all. The door to the sutlers creaked open, letting in a swirl of snow and a blast of frigid air. A figure filled the doorway, broad-shouldered and solid, shaking the snow from his hat. It was Silas. He took in the scene in an instant. The silent, watching crowd, Mrs. Davies's triumphant sneer, Alara's pale, stricken face. His own face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He walked through the parted crowd and came to a stop beside Alara, his presence a sudden, unassailable wall. He didn't look at her, but she felt the warmth of him, a tangible shield against the room's hostility. He gently took the heavy sack of flour from her trembling hands. Then he turned his gaze upon Mrs. Davies. His winter sky eyes were glacial. "You have something to say about my wife?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously so. It held none of the deference of a scout to an officer's wife. It held the authority of a man on his own ground. Mrs. Davies, momentarily taken aback by his sudden appearance, quickly recovered her venom. "I was just remarking on the unusual nature of your union, Mr. Kane. A woman of letters and a man who can't read them." Silas didn't flinch. He looked around the silent room, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the onlookers before settling back on Mrs. Davies. What he did next stunned everyone, most of all Alara. "Every word you say is true," he said, his voice ringing with a strange, stark clarity. The admission hung in the air, electric. "I was a drifter. When I got here, I couldn't read a lick. In this marriage," he paused, turning his head just enough to look at Alara, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "It started as a way to solve a problem." A collective gasp went through the room. Mrs. Davies's face was a mask of vindicated glee. She had won. She had exposed them. "But you're wrong about one thing," Silas continued, his voice dropping lower, pulling the focus of every person in the store. He reached out and placed a hand on Alara's arm, a simple, proprietary gesture that was both a comfort and a claim. "You see this woman? This woman you're trying so hard to shame? She's taught me more than just letters. She's taught me what it is to have a home, what it is to stand for something, what it is to be a better man than I was." He turned his full attention back to Mrs. Davies, his eyes blazing. "So you are right. I was an illiterate drifter, but I'm not that man anymore. I am Silas Kane, this woman's husband. And this child she carries," he stated, his voice booming with unshakable conviction, "is my child, my heir. And if anyone in this room, or in this fort, has a problem with that, or speaks another ill word against my wife, they will answer directly to me." He didn't shout. He didn't make a threat. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the raw power of absolute sincerity. He had taken Mrs. Davies's poison and transformed it into a testament. He had taken their fragile, fabricated life and, in front of the entire community, declared it real. He had sacrificed his privacy, admitted his shortcomings, and claimed her and her unborn child with a fierce, unwavering pride that left no room for doubt. The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Davies stood with her mouth agape, her victory turned to ash. The onlookers shifted, their expressions changing from prurient curiosity to something akin to awe. They had come to see a fallen woman shamed. They had instead witnessed a man rise to his full height to defend his family. Silas, without another word, picked up the sack of salt, nodded once to the stunned sutler, and gently guided Alara by the elbow toward the door. As they stepped out into the swirling snow, leaving the hushed drama behind them, Alara felt as if she were breathing for the first time in months. The lie had been spoken aloud, and in the speaking had been burned away, leaving only a hard, beautiful, and terrifying truth in its place. The walk back to the cabin was a silent journey through a world muffled by falling snow. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots and the pounding of Alara's heart. Silas's hand had not left her elbow. It was a steady, warm pressure that anchored her in the dizzying aftermath of the confrontation. He had done it. He had stood before their accusers and built a fortress around her with nothing but his own raw honesty. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the banked fire rushed to meet them. Silas released her arm and set the supplies on the table. He moved to the hearth, adding a log to the fire, his back to her. The air was thick with everything that had just happened, with everything that had remained unsaid between them for months. The dam of her composure, held together by sheer will for so long, finally broke. Tears welled in her eyes, not of shame or fear this time, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude that left her breathless. "Silas," she began, her voice thick. He turned from the fire, his face grim, his eyes shadowed. "I am sorry, Alara. I shouldn't have made a spectacle of you like that. It was—" "No," she interrupted, taking a step toward him. "Don't be sorry." She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing past the guarded scout, past the clumsy letter writer, to the man who had just publicly claimed her shame as his honor. "You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to claim the child. That wasn't part of our arrangement." The arrangement changed, he said simply, his gaze intense. He took a hesitant step toward her, closing the distance between them. "It changed for me a long time ago." He stopped just before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and cold, clean air. "Why?" she whispered, the question encompassing everything. "Why the letters? Why the marriage? Why this grand, defiant gesture?" "The letters," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I told you the truth of it. I was a lonely man watching a lonely woman, and I was a fool. I thought I could give you something, but I just made a mess." He shook his head, a look of self-reproach crossing his features. "But the marriage, staying here, patching this roof, and sharing these meals, that stopped being about cleaning up my mess pretty fast." His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held hers. They were no longer guarded, but wide open, revealing a vulnerability that mirrored her own. "I didn't want to leave when my shoulder healed," he confessed, his voice dropping even lower, so she had to lean in to hear him. "I kept finding things that needed fixing. A loose board here, a drafty window there. But it wasn't the cabin I was fixing. I was just looking for an excuse to stay, an excuse to be near you." He reached out, not to her arm this time, but to her face, his callous thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped and traced a cold path down her cheek. His touch was hesitant, reverent. "I love you, Alara," he said. The words were not the flowing prose from the stolen letters. They were simple, direct, and more powerful than any poem she had ever written. "Not because you're a fine nurse or because you can read Shakespeare. I love you for the way you look when you think no one is watching, for the way you care for things, for the strength in you that you don't even see. This started as a lie, I know it did, but it has become the only truth I want. You are my wife." All the air seemed to leave her body. His confession was a key, turning the lock on the room in her heart she thought would remain sealed forever. The memory of Thomas was a sweet, sad melody from a different life. Silas was the here and now. He was the man who had seen her at her most broken and had not turned away. He had built a life around her for her. She couldn't speak. The emotion was too vast, too new. Instead, she took his hand, the rough, capable hand of the scout, the hand that had learned to trace the shape of letters for her, and slowly, deliberately, placed it on the curve of her belly. At that very moment, as if on cue, the baby gave a strong, definitive kick against his palm. Silas's breath hitched. A look of pure, unadulterated wonder transformed his face. His eyes shot from her belly to her face, wide with a question. Alara finally found her voice, a soft, sure whisper that sealed their new reality. "He knows his father," she said. It was her answer. It was her acceptance. It was her own confession, spoken not in words, but in a shared touch that promised a future. Silas's other hand came up to cup her face, and he leaned down and kissed her. It It was not a passionate, demanding kiss, but one of tenderness and relief, a sealing of a pact made not before a magistrate, but here, in the firelit warmth of the home they had built together out of a lie. The howling wind outside seemed to fade away, its lonesome cry no match for the quiet, unassailable truth that now filled the small cabin. A few weeks later, a deep and abiding peace had settled over the cabin, as thick and comforting as the blanket of snow that now covered the landscape. The fort and the town attached to it had largely left them alone. The gossip had not vanished entirely, but it had lost its venomous edge, replaced by a grudging respect. Mrs. Davies was said to be suffering from a case of wounded pride, a malady for which Alara, in her professional opinion, could offer no cure. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. It was Dr. Abernathy. Silas, who had been oiling his rifle by the fire, stood up, his posture immediately protective. "Doctor," Silas said, his voice a neutral welcome. "Kane, Mrs. Kane," the doctor said, nodding to them both. He held out a canvas parcel. "Brought you some things. Laudanum, clean linen, some of my wife's chamomile tea. For when the time comes." Alara took the parcel, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you, doctor. That's very generous." "Nonsense," he grumbled, though his eyes were kind. "Just ensuring my best nurse is well cared for." "Your husband here," he said, glancing at Silas with a new measure of respect. He made quite an impression at the sutlers. "Takes a certain kind of man to speak a hard truth like that." He cleared his throat. "You need anything, you send word." With a final nod, he was gone. Alara and Silas looked at each other over the parcel. It was an olive branch, an acceptance. They were no longer outcasts, but a part of the tough, pragmatic fabric of the frontier. A family. The final image of their old life, the one defined by secrets and shame, faded away completely. It was replaced by the simple, profound reality of their new one. The final image was this: the fire crackling, the wind whistling a harmless tune against the sturdy walls of their home. Silas sat in one of the chairs, a book open in his lap, one of her medical texts. His finger moved slowly beneath the words, his voice a low, careful murmur as he read aloud about the treatment of winter fevers. Alara sat on the floor, her back resting against his legs, her head on his knee. She was knitting something small and white from a ball of softwool. Her hand rested on his thigh, a casual, intimate touch that spoke of an easy, established affection. As he stumbled over the word inflammation, she reached up without looking, her finger tapping the page to help him. He found his place and continued, his voice growing in confidence. The letters had started as a lie between them, a source of confusion and pain. Now, they were a bridge, a shared language, a testament to the life they were building word by word, day by day. Outside, the Wyoming winter raged, but inside the small cabin, two people, once profoundly alone, had found their shelter in each other. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments.